Throughout Scripture, we are to demonstrate our faith by our works, by our deeds, by a changed life. So it doesn't talk about the origin of that. It's not saying someone is righteous because they worked hard enough. This is the reflection of their obedience to God, and they're living it out. So it could be theoretical. It could also be the demonstration of one who's living in obedience, the other who's not. And it's not that God predetermined one or the other. It's that this is the expression of their faith, or lack thereof.
Does God give grace to every single person equally to follow after him?
That can be circumstantial. In other words, does God desire equally that everyone follows after him? Yes, I believe the answer is. Does he give the same opportunity? There are conditions of heart. There are responses. There are 1,001 things God doesn't tell us. In other words, I think one of the bigger differences between us is if I see a text that says X, Y, Z, God does this, I'm not trying to figure out how it works or how God could know this. I'm just embracing what the text says. So it doesn't, I'm not saying you're denying the text. I'm simply saying the philosophical questions. When you asked me if I was a Molinist, I had to look it up because I'd never used the term before. All right? Because it's not an insult. But it's just an area to say, I see God expressing his mercy. He mercies all through the cross. Well, and then he works with different hearts and lives. He knows where to draw one and why one and not another.
Well, let me expand a little bit upon that because I think it's an important difference between us. When you say you're just trying to work with the text and seemingly implying that somebody else in the room isn't, I'm not sure who it might be, but isn't it true that this is not the first time this conversation has been had?
Surely.
This conversation's been going on for thousands of years, right?
Sure.
So isn't it probable, in fact, isn't it absolutely certain that you have governing presuppositions theologically, whether you identify them with a particular camp or not? Aren't they there?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so can't we examine them more clearly when we can identify them and see how people have discussed these things than just simply saying, I'm not going to get involved with
so let me explain. My presupposition is if God does not give me access to certain information, I shouldn't try to pry and figure it out. I don't have to ever figure out how he knows certain things in advance. Or I don't have to. It doesn't tell me to. It simply tells me in Scripture to bow down and worship him as God and to rest in that assurance and then to take at face value the other statements. So I don't find a contradiction. I don't find a struggle with how God can foreknow without foreordaining. I know you say the only logical Arminianism is an open theism. Right. That's your logical conclusion. As I look at the text, God inhabiting eternity, he's not time-bound to me. He's not just trying to figure out what's going to happen here and then write and fix this, because he transcends all of that. So it's mixing categories of eternity and time to me that I don't see Scripture mixing.
It sounded like you were just saying, though, we can't actually answer the question as to how God knows the future outside of simply stating, well, he's somehow eternal.
Transcends time.
He transcends time, which is not a biblical phrase.
Isaiah 57:15, Shochenan, he inhabits eternity. Since time is something created, and we know scientists tell us it's created, it started at a certain point, even science knows that, right? So he inhabits eternity, therefore he transcends time. Okay. I think it's a biblical proposition.
Okay, so the Bible is clear enough to tell us about God's relationship to time, but we can't answer the question of when he created, and he knew what was going to happen in time, how he knew that.
No, we can't, because the Bible doesn't tell us. It does tell us, though, that he did not ordain everything that happens. That it does tell us.
How about the text in Isaiah 41? How can God challenge the false gods to not only tell us what's going to happen in the future, but also tell us what happened in the past, that we may consider them and know their outcome? How can he challenge the false gods to do that if, from his own perspective, he didn't know the outcome of those things because there was no purpose in it?
He did know the outcome. Who said he didn't? Okay. I'm not trying to be obtuse. I honestly don't follow the question or conclusion. Of course he knew the conclusion. He knew the purpose. He knew all of it. And he decided to create a world where there would be certain freedoms. Because for God to accomplish his will, there had to be certain freedoms given so it would not be a world of automatons. For example, when you were just jokingly talking about Joseph and his brothers, right? That God wasn't forcing them to do something, but they were doing what they were predestined to do. They were doing what God made them to do. All right, my turn. Yes?
Write that down.
All right, here we go. Okay. If salvation has nothing whatsoever to do with us, it's not based on our response or anything in us. In other words, God didn't foreknow.
Correct that one.
Right. God did not foreknow that I would believe or that you would humble yourself. So Salvation is purely based on God's sovereign choice. And nothing that he saw this in James, he saw this in Michael, so he saved us, but he didn't see the same thing in someone else.
You're talking about unconditional election.
Right, unconditional
His election is not based upon foreseen.
Right, isn't that somewhat of a divine flip of the coin? If it's based on nothing in any human being, it could have just as well been someone else. And in that sense, is the equivalent to a flip of the coin.
Well, I don't believe that an eternal being can flip a coin, first of all. Which
He
proves
can't?
grace is
Can he
not
build a coin too big to flip?
well, there's a good question. What does flip? I've proven my points. But the question is, what does flipping mean in eternity? That's we can go a long ways here with this, but
if
but
the choice is completely arbitrary?
My point is, an ultimate being cannot do anything that is arbitrary. That's my first point. All right. Secondly, we are told what the basis of God's choice is in Ephesians chapter 1, according to the kind intention of His will, not our will.
But it wasn't
and so
towards
God's
everyone,
will. It was God's will freely to create. Could God have not created? I don't know. But it was His will to freely create, and what He tells us in Scripture is that He's chosen to do so in such a way that it's all according to the good pleasure of His will. So that's not a flip of the coin, but it certainly shows that God is free when it comes. Mercy and grace has to be free. He did not have to mercy me because I was somehow better than somebody else.
But there's no injustice then, because He created everyone without them asking to be created them all damnable. Right? In other words, He created us in such a way that the only possible destiny for all of us was damnation, unless He chose to have mercy on some.
No, I think that's a misrepresentation of the position we take. We believe in federal headship. We fell in Adam. And so just as it is right for God to credit or impute the righteousness of Christ to us without, quote unquote, asking us, it was right for God to include us in Adam, just as it was right for Achan to be stoned.
But when he created the human race, He created us with a specific decree that we would all be fallen.
Well, but Adam was created. You got to remember that
Adam said
the fall's not something that's just simply an ancillary thing.
I understand that, but it was by God's decree and plan. So in that sense, He created a race that would be a damned race, so He could have mercy on some.
That in time falls in Adam, and that He treats them in Adam and in Christ.
That's what He decreed. He created a race that would be a damned race, so He could have mercy on some, and that somehow is a sign of goodness.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Because can I expand upon that?
Yeah, please.
Because that is what brings about the very parameters and foundation of the incarnation itself. This is the very means by which God demonstrates His mercy and grace, which, by the way, transcend categories of mere justice, is that He enters into